The multi-billion-dollar transit plan on November's ballot is blasted by environmental groups who say it favors freeway expansion over mass transit. A pair of challengers try to block Mayor Kevin Faulconer's march to re-election in June, and the political balance on San Diego City Council could shift this year. Plus, the lone Democrat among San Diego County supervisors is under siege from a pair of Republicans who accuse him of misdeeds in office. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, reporter Joshua Emerson Smith at UT. Good to see you today.
Good to be here.
And KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, Mark.
And KPBS North County reporter Allison St. John. Hi, Allison.
Great to be here.
Glad to have you back today. Well, voters will decide in November on whether to increase the sales tax in San Diego County by half a cent over 40 years. The hike would raise billions in coming years for freeway projects, public transit, road repair, among other things. But environmental groups and San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulconer have lined up against it. Here's what the mayor had to say about the plan.
It's not a measure that enjoys consensus at this time. When you have taxpayer advocates opposed to it, when you have representatives of the environmental community opposed to it, when you saw that it was going to be a tax increase for 40 years, that's not a measure that was ready to go. And I've said particularly on a sales tax measure that can be regressive on hardworking families in San Diego. That's not the right approach. I was opposed to it, and I think you saw so many people out in the community that were opposed to it as well.
All right, a controversial thing, obviously, Joshua. How much sales tax increase are we talking about, and who's pushing this plan?
Half-cent sales tax increase being pushed by the San Diego Association of Governments. This is the regional transportation agency that does most of the big freeway and road projects throughout the county.
Okay, so break this down for us a little bit. What is in this proposed plan? How does the spending kind of generally break up?
This is the funding plan to kind of fill the gaps in their larger regional transportation plan. And actually, it's very heavy on public transportation. About 14% go to roads and highways, and the rest is non-highway funding.
Okay, we're going to get into it in a second here about why the environmental groups still aren't happy about that. Andrew, I wanted to ask you, what does infrastructure mean here for these billions going to infrastructure?
Sure. Well, about 30% of the tax revenue is dedicated to local infrastructure, but that's defined fairly broadly. So it would be a grant program that would go to individual city governments. That it could cover road repair, traffic light synchronization. It could also cover public transit, actually. That was something that some progressives on the SANDAG board advocated for. They said, you know, if we want more public transit in our own communities, can we use this local money to fund those projects? And so that's part of the plan as well.
Okay. Now, we should note who SANDAG is, this Association of Governments. Who's on the board, and what power do these folks really have to shape the future?
Well, they have a lot of power. This is a 21-member board with city council members, mayors, supervisors from all over the county. So, yeah, it's very influential.
Okay, and this plan, this particular tax that they're going to put forward here, right, or a proposal for this tax on the ballot, that's just part of this really overall plan that's already taken some heat as it's been rolled out here in recent months.
Yeah, exactly. The regional transportation plan, which is updated every 5 years, and it's a long-range plan for $200 billion. A previous version of the plan was challenged and is now actually in state Supreme Court for not properly addressing greenhouse gas emissions. So this is a hotly contested plan, and the environmentalists felt like this particular tax hike was going to fund a plan that they didn't agree with in principle.
Okay, so that's been the real hot button here, is the environmental groups really don't like the overall plan, so they're not crazy about coming up with this tax to fund it.
Right, even though the tax, if you look at it, if you just look at the tax increase, the proposal looks like it's very heavily funding public transportation. The plan that it's going to fund, the broader umbrella, they disagree with the actual mix of where the projects move forward. They feel like the public transportation doesn't happen soon enough in the plan, and the road expansions happen too early in the plan.
And
Okay.
one of the
Andrew?
tricky things here is, so SANDAG has actually gone through several iterations of how they would spend this money. They've had a lot of discussion about it. Board members and public input have all, sort of shifted priorities back and forth. And SANDAG is actually a board that's the board that makes these decisions is made up of local city representatives for the most part, so mayors and city council members. They really have an interest in protecting their own constituents and getting money bringing back to those districts. So, there was a previous plan that gave 50% to public transit. That ended up getting cut down to 42%, and most of that money went to local infrastructure. The money that would have gone to public transit was diverted to local infrastructure, and that's really a testament to how the SANDAG board is actually made up of local representatives.
I guess one of my questions is, we are in urgent need of investment in infrastructure. Everybody can see, if you try to get from A to B, that we have to be investing more in either roads or public transit to change the dynamic. So if this were to fail, I guess my question is, what is the alternative? It's easy for the mayor to say, I oppose it. But what is the alternative?
That's a good question, yeah. So if this if this tax doesn't pass, or it might not even make it onto the ballot, there's a question of whether the supervisors would approve it. They need to approve it. Then the SANDAG's regional transportation plan could hit some real speed bumps. And SANDAG,
we like that.
Yes, SANDAG has said, I apologize.
That's fine, I love it.
SANDAG said that basically the first thing to go will probably be the public transportation. Then the roads, those projects could be slowed down. Really what it'll do, effectively, it'll set up a showdown probably in 2020 when they update the regional transportation plan and probably make another run at a tax hike.
So for people who really believe that public transit is where all the money should go, they would like to wait until 2020? Is that the strategy?
Yes, they think that time is on their side as millennials get older and become more influential. They'll want to favor public transportation, and in 2020 people will realize the urgency that they see now and that they want to have this big debate in 4 years.
Another possible scenario if this tax measure fails, either before it gets on the ballot or when it does get to the ballot, is we could see it shrink down from a region-wide or county-wide sales tax or transportation measure to a more local one. So the city of San Diego could consider putting its own sales tax on to fund public transit. MTS, the Metropolitan Transit System, which operates public transit, they have a board. They've also been discussing whether or not, if the SANDAG tax fails, they could put their own funding measure on, and that would exclude the more conservative voters in North County. So that could also have a better chances of passing, a 2/3 majority, which is a high hurdle.
Allison?
Well, although, North County seems to be pretty split on this. I noticed that the two cities that have opposed it, Escondido and Poway, are both on 15, which is already seen its expansion plan, whereas the coastal cities that are like dying for some relief on 5 and the rail line, public transit would also help, the Lausanne corridor.
Right.
They are all supporting it.
Right.
So there's a separation in North County. It's not all opposed to it at all.
Well, no, we mentioned at the outset Mayor Kevin Faulkner, of course, of San Diego, his reservations. We have a clip from Jack Daly, Santee City Council member. He speaks passionately about the need for this tax increase. Let's hear that.
I will tell the people of Santee and the people of San Diego, you should increase your taxes, because if you want a quality of life for your kids, you need to pay for it. It will not come free.
All right, a tall order to get this thing passed. I mean, it's 2/3, is it not? That's a big, for whatever the issue, as we saw with fire protection after the 2007 wildfires. It's tough to get that many people to support that.
Right, and they've done polling on this, and the numbers that come out in support of it are very, very close to 2/3. If not exactly 2/3, they might be slightly under it. One of the things that a lot of environmentalists are saying also is they could mount an organized campaign opposing this tax, and if there's any organized opposition to it, that could shrink it down below, far below 2/3. So, it's definitely one of the things that you heard in a lot of the discussion about where they're going to spend all this money is we have to make it politically viable. Well, without the environmentalists, you could argue it's not politically viable.
Well, if you look for a little context, back in 2004 when they extended Transnet, which is the half-cent sales tax that does most of the local funding for all of the local funding right now for SANDAG, That thing had some, as I understand it, that had some opposition from environmental groups, nothing like the coalition we're seeing now opposing this thing. And in 2004, the extension of the Transnet sales tax passed by only 67%. It was actually less than a percentage point needed, because you need 66% to pass it.
The 2/3.
Yeah.
I do want to talk briefly. We heard from Mayor Faulkner, and he listed the reasons. He mentioned that a sales tax can be regressive, which is true, although in California we do have exemptions for certain necessities. So, comparing it to other states, the sales tax in California is not as regressive as it is in other places. He also said it doesn't enjoy consensus at this time. Well, Mayor Faulkner actually wasn't at the SANDAG board meetings where all of this was being discussed. He typically sends his alternate, Lori Zaff. And so, it's a little bit... I think it's problematic for him to make that argument, because he could have been there actually helping to build this consensus, like he did, to his credit, for the city's climate action plan.
And it's worth mentioning that other members of his council are in support of it. Todd Gloria is a major supporter and makes the point that if we vote it down, that's $7 billion for public transit gone.
And local infrastructure, of course. We all know the city of San Diego has a lot of roads to repair and a lot of libraries to fix. And so, this measure could bring a lot of money back into the city of San Diego.
Now, before we leave this topic, regardless of how much you push and you plan and put money forth for mass transit here, I did want to throw out the idea in our car culture, especially in Southern California, century of ingrained car culture, with gas prices so low, realistically, are we really going to get people onto mass transit just because SANDAG or some leaders say, geez, you really ought to do this?
Well, I got to say, as someone who's been using the transit, the coast,
a bit of a commute up and down the coast,
and has discovered the joy of being able to sit and actually work on the train and have a wonderful view and not have to worry about the traffic, I think. And the other thing is that you hear about the younger generation not necessarily wanting to buy a car first thing. They want to be able to walk or take their bike or public transit to their job. They don't necessarily, that whole image thing of owning a car, I think, is beginning to change with as the generations change.
The tough culture to change. Well, I mean, for the sake of the environment, I think we all hope that certainly we get out of the cars and start.
Well, the city has said it's going to do this under its climate action plan, and the way that they're going to do it is by trying to focus most of the new development around transit hubs. So having density in major transit corridors and trying to keep all the new growth there so that people can easily hop on a bus or a trolley and get to work. That's what the city's trying to do. And what the environmentalists have been saying is that SANDAG's plan is actually undermining those efforts.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how this all plays out going forward here, and certainly as we move on to November, whether this thing passes or not and gets to the ballot. We are going to move on now. San Diego in recent years has changed from a Republican to a Democratic city, at least in terms of voter registration. Republican Mayor Faulkner is up for re-election, as are the odd-numbered council seats this year. One of those, Sherry Leitner's district, one seat, is a must-win for both parties. Andrew, let's take a brief look at the mayor's race. Tell us about the opposition right now ahead of the primary next month.
Sure. So you have two candidates with real name recognition. There's Ed Harris. He's a Democrat, lifeguard by trade. He did sit on the city council for 9 months after Kevin Faulkner moved up from the council to the mayor's office. You also have Lori Saldana. She's a professor at the Community College District, teaching IT. She also sat in the state assembly for 6 years, so she does have some legislative experience. She was a Democrat, then she switched to being an independent, but her policies are very progressive. Those two are very far behind on fundraising, very far behind on political organization. So, are they getting traction? It's possible. I haven't seen any real polling done, so it's kind of speculation at this point. But the mayor has had a lot of bad publicity recently, particularly with public safety, police officer recruitment and retention, which is a big problem in San Diego.
Continues to be a big problem.
And we heard this week and last week a lot of people talking about long 911 wait times. When they call 911, they're on hold for several minutes. So, the mayor has tried to address that problem. We'll see if his plan works. But these two opponents, Harris and Saldana, have really hit him hard. And, I think that the presidential race could also play a role in this, too. So,
well, it could, yeah. Maybe not so much in the primary because California just went out of the spotlight here with Trump's victory this week.
It could play a role in that if even if, assuming that Trump is the nominee, a lot of Republicans are really turned off by him, particularly moderate Republicans in San Diego County, or the city of San Diego. So if they choose to either not vote at all because they're just so far turned off by the whole process, that could have an impact on voter turnout, and it's really going to be an issue of turnout. So Kevin Faulconer has never won an election in November. He's always run in either a special election or another other than November election. So
but somebody's got to get to November. He could win it all in the primary.
So if he gets more than 50%, he's reelected in June. If Harris and Saldana manage to dilute the vote enough to push it back to November, then I think that's a problem for him.
All right, let's get back to District 1 here. Tell us who's in that seat now and why isn't the incumbent running?
Right. Well, Sherry Leitner is the current representative. She's the council president. She represents District 1, which covers La Jolla, University City, Carmel Valley, the northern coastal communities. She's limited to 2 terms, so she can't run for re-election, and that makes it an open seat. She is a Democrat. It's basically seen as the swing district in San Diego County, in the city of San Diego.
In terms of which party is going to control the city council.
Exactly. Yeah. So the other races are pretty clear-cut. It's either a Republican or Democrat who's going to win. The 2 main candidates running to replace her are Ray Ellis. He's a Republican. He's a business owner. He ran against Sherry Leitner in 2012 and lost. He's endorsed by all the typical organizations you would expect a Republican to be endorsed by, the Lincoln Club and the Chamber of Commerce. Barbara Bree is the Democrat, the main Democrat in the race. She is an entrepreneur. She started some businesses and a political organization to encourage women to run in politics.
And those 2 don't really differ all that much on the issues, right?
I interviewed them both. Just speaking to them, they're in an election season. Politicians don't really like to get really specific about their policies. They like to talk about big ideas and who they are as people.
Going to make District 1 great again.
Yeah, exactly. There are some policy differences. The clearest one is minimum wage. Barbara Bree supports it. Ray Ellis opposes it. They all have different things to say about infrastructure, public safety, the budget. But real policy differences. Sometimes it's tough to tell.
Now, is it likely District 1 will be decided in June, or is there just too many moving parts here to?
Well, that really depends on how much vote the other 3 minor candidates.
Because there are other candidates we haven't talked about.
Right. Yeah.
One of them named Leitner.
Yeah. So Bruce Leitner is Sherry Leitner's husband, the incumbent's husband. He decided to enter the race just about a week, I think, before the filing deadline. He is a Republican also, although he does support the minimum wage, so that increase. So that distinguishes him from Ray Ellis. He also despises Ray Ellis, largely in part because of that 2012 election in which he ran against, Ellis ran against his wife.
His wife, right.
The other 2 candidates, you have Kyle Heiskala. He's a staff member in Sherry Leitner's office.
And young.
He's very young. He's 23 years old, although you would not know it, honestly, from talking to him. He's very informed and intelligent. He knows a lot about the city policy or city government. He's been working there for 6 years in Sherry Leitner's office. And then you have Louis Rodolico. He is a retired hospital architect, and he doesn't have a whole lot of political experience. His real issue is the Regents Road Bridge, which has not really been a real issue in the city for some time now. But he also has answers to other questions that I asked him. So I don't think in this race with 5 candidates, there isn't really any one candidate who's so outrageously uninformed and completely ignorant.
Right, and it looks splintered enough that we may have fun with this all the way to November and not be decided in June.
I think so.
All right, well, we're still talking politics, and we're going to move to the county level now, where Republicans for decades have had a lock on the 5 county supervisor seats. That changed 4 years ago when Dave Roberts became the lone Democrat on the powerful Board of Supervisors. But he's in an especially tough fight for re-election. Allison, start with why Dave Roberts is having to fight for it so much this time.
Well, yes, he got into some trouble in his first term. Just last year, several members of his staff left. Quite an unusual number of people left who suggested turmoil in the staff, and there were accusations of creating a toxic work environment. And then the county board, his colleagues, eventually decided to pay $310,000 of taxpayer money to avoid further lawsuits, because some of the members of his staff were actually threatening to sue and claiming that he had misused some of the public money for his own campaigns, things like that. And perhaps worst of all, that he'd offered a raise to one of his staff people for misleading the HR investigation into these allegations. So he is definitely in a defensive position in this, which is very unusual for the County Board of Supervisors, who normally hold their spots for decades.
And what's Dave Roberts been saying about all of this? And I'm going to keep saying Dave Roberts because there's another Roberts on the board.
Yes, not Ron Roberts, right. Dave Roberts, that's right. He says, look, he said he made some mistakes, he's taken responsibility, we've moved on. And the fact is that he is quite popular with many of his constituents, because he's always out there. Everywhere you go in North County, there is Dave Roberts. So he has made a lot of supporters, I think, in his district over the 4 years that he's been there. So he casts this as more a question of leadership. He says, I've taken a strong leadership role, I've done my job well, this is passed, the DA has decided not to investigate me, so let's bygones be bygones and move on.
But his challengers are not saying, let's move on here. Let's talk about those challengers. Who's lining up against him now?
So he has two North County mayors who are lining up against him. One of them is Mayor Sam Abed from Escondido. The other one is the Encinitas Mayor, Kristen Gaspar. And, the Republican Party used to hold all 5 seats on that board for decades. And Dave Roberts is the first Democrat to have broken that mold. So they are very keen to get it back. So we have these two Republican mayors who, interestingly enough, are quite different. I think they represent the sort of difference in North County Republicans. The coastal Republicans are somewhat different from the inland Republicans. They're much more moderate, more interested in open space and conservation, that kind of thing. Right. So he's got... I think
Sam Abed would be the more conservative one, and with Escondido, and then Kristen Gaspar would be more moderate or shading toward liberal, perhaps,
Abed
for a Republican.
As you would expect, has gotten the endorsement of the Republican Party, whereas, in fact, Kristen Gaspar, who is a business owner, her husband and she has built up a business in the last few years to about 140 employees. So she has gotten the support of the business community. And it's unlikely, I think, that anyone's going to get more than 50% in June. I mean, you never know. That's what some of them are trying to do to save themselves money. But looks like one of those two Republicans is going to end up against
let's talk about the Republican lock on the county board. So, it's not just Dave Roberts who is at play here, because we have Ron Roberts and Greg Cox, two moderate Republicans who are also up for re-election, or they can't run for re-election, I believe, correct?
Well, that's right. But recently they passed term limits, so now this is all their last terms. So Ron Roberts will be up, I believe, in 2 years, and Greg Cox, who's running this year, is probably going to get his last term and will be up in 4 years.
So it's a look-ahead election this time to see this whole board could change Republican to Democrat for the first time in forever.
I think that's it. They're looking ahead, and just like the city of San Diego has turned more Democratic registered voters, the same applies to the county. The unincorporated areas are still predominantly Republican, but not Dave Roberts, but Ron Roberts in the sort of downtown area and Greg Cox in the sort of South Bay area are very likely to get replaced by Democrats. So in that case, this election to the Republicans is key, because there are actually 10,000 more Republicans registered to vote in that district. So they say we need to get this back now so that we have the predominant vote.
But with the split of support for the Republicans, it's probably going to the general election, which should favor Roberts, right? I mean, it seems like he's got
Dave Roberts
has a strong chance to win there.
Well, some people say it depends on which of the Republicans win.
Well, this is a wonderful segue to a bite we have here. Allison talked with political consultant Tom Shepard about what it takes to win District 3. Let's hear that.
They created a district that does kind of span two different cultures almost, from Escondido to the small coastal communities. And it's what makes it difficult to represent that district, and it's why I think Sam has a potential solid base of support in Escondido, but questionable ability to expand it beyond that city.
So,
Allison?
That's one thing that Tom Shepard says when I asked him, what do you think about the Republican Party's endorsement of Sam Abed?
I was going to say, is that smart?
He said, oh, that's a godsend for Dave Roberts.
Right.
In other words, that it would be much easier for Dave Roberts to defeat Sam Abed.
Well,
in
and
November.
let me throw out the Donald Trump at the top of the ticket here. If it goes on to November, does that affect this way down ballot race here, the national ticket?
I think it would. I think it will have big impact on a lot of the local elections across the country.
So this
really.
is an example here in Southern California.
Right.
And as much as Republicans in California will try to distance themselves from Donald Trump, he is the standard bearer of that party. So I think it's going to be really tough for Republicans in November.
You just see more turnout.
Yeah, well, that will be interesting too. What about turnout, Allison? As you say, there's this dynamic of the local Republicans supporting Sam Abed here, and does turnout diminish? And again, that would help the incumbent Dave Roberts, you would think.
Yes, I think so. Although I think really, I think the character of the challenges is important. Can they make an impact on this? Is a very large district.
Right.
I mean, there's 300,000 registered voters, so it's quite expensive to get your name out if they don't know who you are, and many people don't even know what the supervisors do and don't realize that they make a difference to land use, to public safety, to social safety net. So if, in fact, one of those candidates, and I should just mention that Kristen Gasper has won $100,000 from the Chamber of Commerce, so she has some money to put her name on.
All right, well,
that could be a challenge.
I'm going to have to cut us off, and it's going to be interesting as we move on to November on all of these stories. That does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Joshua Emerson Smith of the San Diego Union-Tribune, Andrew Bowen of KPBS News, and North County reporter Allison St. John, also of KPBS News. And a reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.